Hey guys, so doing a video on the triggers today. Coming in this week, essentially how they work is they have a pre and post travel. It shims against the gearbox itself and it shims against the grip. If you come to this point and you sort of don't know what you're looking at, or you haven't taken apart a loop before, go watch my disassembly video. I disassemble the LevAR literally to exactly this point, and the whole reason I didn't touch this piece is because technically you don't need to do it for anything else. But now we are. Watch that video if you haven't seen it already. Come to this point, and then we'll go from here. This piece is only being held on by this single screw on the back. For general maintenance and stuff, you don't need to take this back screw and big hammer assembly out. Generally, you can just leave it all in one piece. So if I come right here, so it's spring loaded underneath, so just do this bit slowly. There we are. So that is your hammer piece. Now you're here. Obviously, I've got one of mine installed already, but yours is going to look a bit different. The main thing will be is that this spring here, if I just pop it out of its seat, this spring here is likely to pop off as soon as you open this top bit. So all it is just a little spoke there of the spring. That's highly likely to just remove itself as you do this. Once you've done that, I would make an effort to keep things sort of as they are here. So this piece is under spring tension. This spoke is sitting under here, and that is your reset. So when the lever reaches its full closing travel, that little click is this little button here. And what that's doing is setting the trigger. One thing I will note is that you are absolutely going to need light Loctite for this install. Similar to the Waldo Dynamics nozzles, you are going to need Loctite for these screws, because if they come loose, your trigger is going to adjust in the most annoying way possible, and it might mean that it accidentally fires by itself, which can be a safety hazard. So you must use light Loctite on these scrub screws. Aside from that, essentially how they work is really simple. You've got one closer to the bottom of the gearbox and one at the top of the gearbox. And essentially all they do is they just shim the trigger. You have one for pre-travel, which is the one at the top here. This is how much play there is in the trigger before it sets the hammer. And then you have the post-travel, which is the one that sits on top if we're looking at it from this direction. And what that does is that tensions against the grip. And you can see probably my one, there's just a little mark there where it's just been tensioned against it, and all it does is that it means that once you pull the trigger, the hammer breaks, and there'll be, if you want it done as like a hair trigger, it'll break and then it will just stop. There'll be no more travel. I'll show you this at the end of the video. The way to adjust these is you need a 2mm hex key. You are going to adjust these from the back of the trigger itself. So my general recommendation for tuning these is for the pre-travel, I would only put it out a tiny bit. Maybe about that much. It's maybe a mil, 1.2, 1.3 mil, not far at all. And for the post travel, I'd recommend probably putting out about 2 or 3. That's actually quite loose, so I'm just gonna Loctite that before I go. It's generally good practice to Loctite these adjustment screws anyway, specifically more so as this is a trigger piece. You don't want it to have any sort of unwanted side effects with moving or anything like that. And if you do it with a nozzle, then it can adjust your power for you. I'd put a tiny bit of light blue Loctite, and then what I'm going to do is put it all the way through. Really work that in, work that through the threads. And that means when I unscrew it again, it's going to be coated evenly along those threads. Right, so I'm going to put it to about here. That is my general recommendation. It'll look something like that. Actually, that could come out a bit more based on my experience. Something like that. That might be a bit more Loctite actually. Similar to how I've got it on the label, where it's only slightly out on the pre-travel and quite a bit out on the post-travel. So from here, if you have it exactly like this, there is a tiny little seat here in the middle, this little cutout. And essentially what this is it's literally just a seat for this trigger bar here. So I'm just gonna whack it on. Use my hex key. I'm just gonna leverage it under, and it's going to come around, and it's going to seat into that. So at this point, you can actually just sort of leave it as it is. The good thing about this little spring saddle is that it keeps it exactly in place. On the stock trigger, this doesn't exist, and it can sort of just slide off whenever. I actually had one person in my Discord where it had come off the trigger stick completely, or it was only half on, and he was getting really low power. So if you think you're getting low power for what you get, and the trigger seems to be working as it is, but you're getting consistently low power, and you've checked like the nozzle, you check your inner barrel, etc., try looking at this and making sure this this spring is in the correct place. So from here, it's quite an easy reinstall. Just put that back on. So the beauty of this adjustment system is that you can actually do it once it's in the gearbox, so you don't have to keep taking it out. So once that screws back on, you can work this back in. Work that back in. I'm going to put this back on. And I'm only just going to put this screw back in. And we'll give that a go. So that's screwed in. What I recommend doing actually is, once you put this back into place, grab your grip by itself with the screw in and reinstall it just like this. This will still tension properly, and you can screw it all the way in. What this means is that you can check your travel. Once it's in, okay, so set like that, and pull the trigger. So that's a bit too much take up for me, and there's also quite a bit of play after the brake. So I would be tempted to actually pull both those out a little bit. And this is essentially going to be your tuning process. You're going to have to take this grip off, put it back on, adjust settings, try again. So I'm going to pull this out a tiny bit more. Wrong way. Pull this out a tiny bit more. And I'm going to shim the pre-travel. Just a bit more like that. So it's really sensitive on the pre-travel, because obviously that's the only thing holding the hammer from dropping. So you're going to have to be quite careful with that one. You can actually test the pre-travel without doing the grip. Yeah, so that's really sensitive. Yeah. I think that's about right. So for me, having just the lightest amount of pressure, releasing it, is quite nice. One thing you have to be careful of doing with these triggers is when you're racking, you're not touching the side of the trigger. Obviously, as I demonstrated there, sometimes touch the side. So I actually think, for me personally, that's a bit too sensitive if I only have to touch the side for it to go off. So I'm going to pull that back maybe a quarter turn. Reset. So there's a tiny bit of take up now. I might even be able to come back a tiny bit, but for me, that's easily enough of a difference over the stock trigger for me to keep that in there. So then I'm going to do the post travel again. It is a little bit long-winded doing this. However, once you've done it and you've Loctited it, that's the key thing to say, is once you've done it and you've Loctited it into position, you shouldn't have to do this very often. So there you go, set. Fires. And there's a tiny bit of take up afterwards. If I pull the trigger, stops there. If you wanted a complete lightweight, very quick, fast to reset trigger, you can set it very, very finely to be as close as you want. If I pull it out just a little bit more, try that. That's very close actually. We'll see if that even fires. Okay, it does fire, but it's firing kind of awkwardly. Yeah, it's firing kind of awkwardly on, very much on the grip. So I would actually bring that out slightly. Obviously, it's completely up to you, but I'm just showing you the tuning process of these triggers. And I'm actually going to push that in, maybe a quarter turn, like that. That is quite loose, so I actually think I would go back and Loctite that, but for the demonstration of this video, it's okay to demonstrate. Just going back on. Trigger, set. Nice. That's very quick. From this point, so for me, I'm satisfied that this is the correct adjustment. If you found that you got to this point and you were finding that the adjustment screws were actually still quite loose, I'm afraid I would recommend you take the screws back out and you re-Loctite, put them to about where this. You might be able to take a picture, or you can maybe use some white Posca pen to mark which position the screw was in. So if you took a pen and you draw a line from here up the grub screw, you could re-put it straight back to where you were. It's quite a nice way of doing it. And just make sure that these are not going to move. At this point, if you're satisfied that the grub screws are completely LOCTITE in, I would put everything back together and then I would check full function and I'd see how you feel about the sensitivity of the trigger. So one thing to note is as these screws are back adjusted, if I take the grip off, if you say had to go back and change, but you're at the field, for example, and you want to change the sensitivity a bit, even with this installed in the gearbox, you can actually access both those grub screws. If you come to it in the field, all you need to do is remove your gas reservoir pins, take the gas reservoir and stock off, take this grip off. You can actually adjust on the fly through the back. The lever can still be in, you can actually adjust on the fly from the back. It's not quite so permanent that you can't adjust it once you've installed it. I would just highly recommend you do most of the adjustment and LOCTITing at this stage. But if you need to, the grub screws can be adjusted and they can be removed and reinstalled from the rear with the gun intact. So some people might opt to do this once all in, but personally, I would rather get it all set up inside because it's a bit of a faff to do it, once it's inside the gearbox. But you can adjust them. It's just a case of taking the grip off and installing that. And yeah, hope everyone gets on with these screws really nicely. My testing has been really good. I've had a few testers give me good reviews. So I really hope people get on with these. And if you have any questions about it, please let me know. Cheers.